We'd like to discuss whether Selihot may be recited or may be asked. We ask for Selicha. We don't just say Selihot. People say we're going to say Selihot. Selihot means forgiveness. Yes, Selicha or Chapara. So obviously we are asking for Selicha. The custom of the Selihot, whether it can be said in the first half of the night, meaning from nightfall up to midnight. Shulchan Aruch writes the ideal time for Selihot is Nohagim lakum be'ashmoret lomar Selihot v'tahanunim. Ashmoret is kind of the last watch, just before dawn. Still night, but it's before dawn. It's close to daylight. At that point is the best time. The Mishnah Berurah explains that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanders in different olamot and comes closest to this world at that part of the night. So therefore the ideal time and the most powerful time to say Selihot is just before the morning. Now, the question is, whether are we entitled to pray the Selihot already from before midnight, the first half of the night? So this is what we're going to discuss now. I'm going to quote Rabbi Moshe Zachut, which I'll soon explain who he was. But before him, Rab Chaim Vital writes clearly in Shara Kavanot and Drush Halayla, he writes clearly in the name of the Arizal that the first half of the night is an inappropriate time to recite the 13 attributes and to pray Selihot at that time. The reason why I'm going to quote Rabbi Moshe Zachut, because he was asked this question and he went into details to explain to us, give us some understanding to what's holding behind this restriction, I'd call it, of doing and saying and asking for Selihot prior to midnight. So for midnight onwards, we regard that close to the morning, and therefore that's more of an etratzon, that's the appropriate time. Even after dawn, prior to the Shachrit, or even after Shachrit, obviously the more effort a person will make to the timing he chooses to the Selihot, the more it will be effective. A person can choose to say Selihot in the afternoon, but what does that show? By the way, I've got a little bit of anyway awake, I've just finished my work, I come and say Selihot, ask for Selicha. That's a low level of Selihot. You can have a higher level. I do it in the morning before I go to work, after Shachrit. Can I higher do it before I pray Shachrit? That means I reduce from my sleeping time. So even I'm not doing it before dawn, but I've reduced and I've got up earlier. So here I've shown I'm troubled about my sins. That's a higher level. So you can do it in Ashmoret just before dawn. It's even more powerful and more great because, as we explained, that's an etratzon. So let's go back to our discussion about saying and asking for Selihot before midnight. So Rabbi Moshe Zachuta, he was born in Amsterdam. And I'm being clear in the details I'm saying about him. I don't usually relate to where a rabbi is born. But he was born in Amsterdam. He grew up there. And then he became a rabbi in Venice. And from Venice, he went to Mantova, and around that region, he was a very big mekubal. He was a student, Rabbi Binyamin Halevi was a student of the Arizal. So he took my couple of generations after the Arizal. He passed away approximately 325 years ago. Okay? So Rabbi Moshe Zachuta, as he knows, he's known as the Ramaz. He wrote the Igrot Ramaz, and he writes a response in regards of this. He was asked, Al Devara Selihot, on the subject of Selihot, which in Mekomot Mu'atim, in some places, they have a custom and practice to do it at night, at the time the prayer beat. He writes a response about this. And the reason why I emphasized Amsterdam is because there was a Sephardi, I would call it a practice minhag, which will soon the Ramaz will reveal to the reason why they had this practice. And the Keter Shem Tov of Rav Gagin mentions this custom that even in London, who a lot of the customs came over from Amsterdam, from the Spanish and Portuguese, what we call today, they had such a custom at Arvit, they would do Selihot. And he says the reason for that is because people found it troublesome to get up in the morning. The air wasn't so good, so they didn't want to get up too early in the morning for reasons, and therefore they preferred reciting the Selihot before going to sleep in the evening. And that out of practicality became like a small custom that in some places they used to say Selihot at Arbit. So his expression of Rabbi Moshe Zachuta is quite harsh. He says, Minhag ta'ut, it's a mistaken custom. V'ra'ui lemon'o, and we should try and stop people from this practice. Similar, interesting, he writes that, similar to the way the Rambam and the Rashba stopped the custom of kaparot. His lashon ke'oto shel hakaparot she'asru Rambam ve'Rashba. Interestingly, we know that the Arizal actually endorsed that custom of the kaparot, but he brings it no worse than that. He says this is the wrong time. And he explains why is it the wrong time to say Slichot, to say the 13 attributes in the first half of the night. Remember, the 13 attributes is actually a tool which we were told by Moshe Rabbeinu, by Hashem he was told, that at times where you're just subject to mercy, you're not worthy of anything, you're only in the hands of mercy. At times where you've got none of your merits, you should use this tactic, which is called the Yud Gimal Tlat Asar Mechilin de Rachme, the Yud Gimal Midot of Rachamim. And he showed Moshe Rabbeinu how exactly to do it. So this comes at times where we are totally reliant on mercy, on Rachamim. They're called the Yud Gimal Midot of Rachamim. Says it brings down Horadat Shefa from Chesed Elyon in order for God to judge us lifnim mishurat adin. God should push aside judgment, completely aside, and ignore judgment and just behave with us in a merciful manner completely. Says the Ramaz, the first half of the night is known as subject to harsh judgments, harsh dinim. Calls it Balayla hu et hastarat haor, the hidden light, and Shat Shilton Memuneh Hadin. Those who are responsible of harsh judgments is on the first half of the night. It's called Pachad Alayla. Whereas the day is Yomam Yetzaveh Hashem Chazdo. The daytime is Chesed. And that's why he says the first half of the night especially is Dever Ba'ofel Ya'aloch Bar Minan. He says, and when you mention this 13 midot, which is Kul Rachamim at the time of harsh judgments, in fact, that will awaken criticism in the upper worlds. And they'll turn around and says, look how dead they are. They're coming. So therefore he says, you should stop people who are saying Yud Gimal Midot at that time of the night. Yeah? It says, he brings an example. He says, even Kaddish was then in Aramaic. The Tosfot explains why Kaddish was said in Aramaic. In Kedusha, the Sidra was said in Lashon Targum. Why? Because we were worried about Kinat of the Malachei Asharet. They will see us saying such things, they'll come and criticize on us. So if we say it in Lashon Targum, which the Malachim don't understand Targum. So he goes on to say, similar to that idea, there's certain times where you don't do it. I will soon show you that could be that the Rambam was actually on those lines, but for a different, Nefilat Apayim. We'll soon discuss that. V'karov hadavar lekitzutz, that means you might end up by saying the 13 attributes at that time of the night, cause the opposite effect. Who wants that? Who wants that? That's what the Ramaz, this is what I'm bringing you for Ramaz. There's a story in the Gemara in Masechet Avodah Zarah. Rabbi Yosef says, Lo litz le'in shetzluta de musafi, in the first 3 hours of the day, some say it's in the 3rd hour of the day, not to say musaf, unless you're together with the congregation, but yachid. There are some times where we have to avoid doing certain things. Similar to that, the 13 attributes in the first half of the night. Okay? Klal ha'oleh, writes the Ramaz, Ramoshe Zachut, Shelo Raui, it's inappropriate to mention the 13 attributes only at the time of Et Ratzon. Yomam Yetzaveh Hashem Chazdo, at the time of Chesed, that's when you should say the 13 attributes. V'kach hu muskam mikol ha'mekubalim. And there's clear proofs from Chachmei HaEmet, he says. Yesh leze re'ayot berurot. Clear proofs leyodeh chokhmah. And if that's the case, we have a rule. If the Talmud doesn't mention anything, and the Chachmei Kabbalah, the scholars of Kabbalah, say something, we tend to follow them. Similar, says Rabbi Moshe Zachut, not wearing tefillin on Chol HaMoed. As the Talmud was not clear, and the Zohar clearly says what to do, says not to wear it, we follow that. Same thing here. We're not told either way according to the Pashtanim, according to the Talmud. Therefore, we follow the Chachmei Kabbalah and we do not. So that's how he concludes. Vidu you can say in the first half of that. There's no problem. Before we go to sleep, he said, Vidu you can say always. Because we're confessing, there's no problem. But the Yud Gimel Mechle de Rachmeh, the Yud Gimel Midot, you don't do it the first half of the night. This ruling was taken on by the Magen Avraham. So he went to the Ashkenazi world as well. It was agreed. And even the Ramaz says none of the Ashkenazi communities do Selihot prior to midnight, prior to the first hour. They don't as well. So it's a white, it's only in Amsterdam. There was, and I'll tell you, it's literally interesting, just an additional. There was a rabbi he wrote a book called the Neve Shalom. His name was Rabbi Eliyahu Hazan, only 100 years ago. A bit more than 150 years ago. He lived in Alexandria in Mitzrayim. They wanted to introduce again to do Selihot before midnight. And he opposed it. He straight away said, no way. And he brought proofs to it. Rabbi Eliyahu Hazan was a descendant from the one who compiled the Achot Ketana, which we say on night, Rabbi Avraham Hazan. The famous Achot Ketana, which we say on the opening of Rosh Hashanah. That was his ancestor, Andalusia, from Spain. So that was Rabbi Avraham Hazan. He was Rabbi Eliyahu Hazan. So Rabbi Moshe Zachuta says he remembers that when he was young, they used to do slichot. Some anashim minhag mu'at of mu'atim of saying slichot at night, but he totally opposes this idea. Now, I want to mention that there's a similar discussion in regards of Nefilat Apayim, which might be relevant to this. In Nefilat Apayim, the two in the Poskim, the Bet Yosef brings from Sar Shalom Gaon, from one of the Geonim. We don't have Vidu in Arbit, you noticed. We don't have Nefilat Apayim in Arbit. We have Nefilat Apayim in Shachrit and Nefilat Apayim in Mincha. Nefilat Apayim means when we put our heads down. Nowadays we don't even do that because of concerns. We won't be able to come up again. But it used to be a custom. They used to properly fall on the floor. Proper Nefilat Apayim. So we do in Shachrit Mincha, not in Arbit. And interestingly enough, the Sar Shalom says it's optional. If you want to do it at night, do it at night. The Shibule Aleket brings that from one of the Geonim, seems to be amongst the Geonim, not to do it at night. Nighttime is not the time to do Nefilat Apayim. So we see this goes back even to the Geonim, that nighttime, especially the first half of the night is not a good time for certain things. The Rambam writes in Perek Hey, in the 5th chapter, Halacha Tetvav, of Ilchot Tefillah, the minhag by everybody is not to do Nefilat Apayim on Arbit. He says some Yachidim do it, but he says the minhag is not to do it at all. And I think he's based on the Gaon, which the Shibul Aleket quotes, which says in the Gaonim, not to do it. So we see even the Rambam was concerned at certain times. He says like you don't say in Shabbat, you don't say in the Moed, you don't say in certain times, you don't say Nefilat Apayim. Same thing, you don't do Nefilat Apayim, Arbit, nighttime. So we see even the Rambam knew the certain times where are inappropriate to do certain kind of viduim and Nefilat Apayim. The reason why I give all of this, and I try to be clear about Moshe Zachuta, because when you read Moshe Feinstein's response in Igrot Moshe, 2nd volume, Siman Kufeh, I think, Moshe Feinstein allowed as a Hora'at Sha'ah. He had a situation that if you're not going to do the Selihot at that time, it won't be done. He allowed to do Selihot because he says that's only Akun to Kabbalah and the Pashtanim. And based on what we've said until now, there's no room for it at all. In fact, it's better to avoid it completely. You can do the Nuschot of this, but not the Yud Gimel Midot at night. So therefore, Chamovadia also in his Tshuvot Yechavedat gives a response in Chelek Vav, if you can have a look there. But all the poskei contemporary poskim bring this, that you cannot rely on this psak of Moshe, especially had he seen probably the words of the Moshe Zechuta inside, perhaps he would have not allowed it at all, and that's what we hold in regards of saying Yud Gimel Midot prior to midnight at night. A small observation which the Moshe Zechuta says, one night in the year, we do it even before midnight, and we say the 13 attribute, is on the night of Kippur, and he relates to it, and he says, Be'im Tomar, and if you'll ask me, why on the night of Yom Kippur, we say Selihot with the 13 attributes? That's not a question. The power of the night of Yom Kippur is so powerful that we know that even the Satan is under control. So it's similar to the concept that we say Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto loud, even though that generally is something which is fitting more for Malachim to say. And we'll discuss that in due course, why Baruch Shem Kevod is said loud. So in the night of Kippur, we're on a different level. We have nothing to concern, because then Hashem even, how do you say, with the Sa'il Azazel in the Avodah of Yom Kippur, the Satan is being kept busy eating bones. He doesn't interfere with us so much. And that's the time, only time we do say, even in the first half of the night, we say the 13 attributes.